Thank you. I'm Kate Meese. I'm the director of the Local Government Commission. We're the conference organizer, so I have the pleasure of welcoming you all this morning to what's the first California Adaptation Forum, so really exciting. And we see this as really a milestone in our state's fight against the social, economic, and environmental consequences of climate change. California is really leading the way on emissions reductions, but no matter how quickly we respond, climate impacts will still occur. Climate change is having and will continue to have widespread impacts on California's diverse populations, our renowned natural resources, and our preeminent economy. We've reached really a decisive tipping point where growing public awareness and unavoidable urgency for response have converged. Our response will need to be coordinated across all sectors and all levels of leadership to protect our great state and to assure ongoing prosperity. Today marks the start of a major step forward in advancing integrated solutions and collaboration across the state. The Local Government Commission, in partnership with the state of California, has organized this inaugural California Adaptation Forum to support and strengthen our statewide community of adaptation practitioners and to drive a coordinated response to safeguard our state. And I have to tell you, I'm just blown away by this group here today. It's really amazing. I was reflecting this morning that when we first started talking about this forum, my ambitious goal was to get 650 people here, and that was ambitious because it was modeled after a national adaptation forum that got about 650 people. And we're going to exceed 800 people today for this California-focused event. And it's not just Californians. We have people representing over 18 states, and we have someone coming from as far as Australia. Is our Australian here? You want to? All right. So that's commitment. Let's see if I have the slide. So as a nonprofit fostering innovation in environmental sustainability, economic prosperity, and social equity, the Local Government Commission has helped trailblazers like you transform communities for more than 30 years. We really focus on helping our over 700 local government members to preserve vital energy, water, and natural resources, and to create great places where people have access to healthy food, to transportation choices, and affordable housing. The need to address climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and responding to the current impacts really adds another layer of urgency and the need for leadership in each of these areas. Tackling what many are calling the biggest challenge of our era will require an unprecedented level of innovation and collaboration. We worked with a multidisciplinary steering committee of local, regional, and state partners to organize this event and to develop this framework, which we hope will guide our conversations over the next 2 days. And the framework is focused on prioritizing the health and safety of all Californians, establishing partnerships across jurisdictions and sectors, investing public and private dollars in ways that reduce risks and increase resiliency, and institutionalizing the assessment of climate change and impacts as standard practice. So if you want to see the full framework, we have that available at the registration desk. This forum is geared towards creating tangible, coordinated action steps. So we'll be asking you guys to engage as active participants over the next 2 days, and we have a number of ways to do that. Using social media, at CAF 14, you can share your thoughts and your forum highlights, and at CAF Next, you can suggest priorities for moving out of the forum. We also have a poster up at the registration desk, so we have high-tech and low-tech solutions to engage. We also, for lunch tomorrow, will be doing networking tables. So we want to give you a chance, if there's an issue that you don't see represented on the agenda or a conversation that you want to have, this is your chance to have a table discussion, and you can sign up at the registration desk to do that. Our steering committee will be meeting on Thursday to debrief from the conference, and we'll be talking about prioritizing coordinated steps moving forward. So we want to make sure all your input is heard over the next 2 days so that it can feed into that discussion. Looking across the state and the nation, we see that all the things you're doing in communities, big and small, really is making a huge difference. You're the leaders creating innovative models for other communities and for other states to follow. But we know that there's still a lot of work to do. And this important and timely conference gives us an opportunity to learn from and be inspired by innovative models that we've selected from really impressive innovations and impressive initiatives from across the state. We hope that you will leave with renewed energy and broader partnerships and a larger suite of tools that you can take home to your communities to help in your fight against climate change and help make your communities more resilient. This conference wouldn't be possible without the input and the support from a number of partners, really an outstanding list, including a steering committee of 26 local, state, and regional leaders, a review committee of 46 members representing diverse sectors, and 85 organizations who partnered with us to promote this event, which is why I think we have such great participation. We also had the generous support of over 40 sponsors who clearly recognize the urgent nature of addressing climate change, and I want to thank them for their critical leadership. They're all recognized in the program that you have in front of you and on the slideshow that will be playing over the next 2 days, and I want to encourage you to see their displays outside of the ballroom and upstairs, and we have some around the registration table as well. So take a look. These are some of the people really engaged and leaders in these issues. And I want to, in particular, highlight a few of our speakers. First, our major supporters, the Nature Conservancy, Professional Engineers in California Government, Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. These are our major sponsors, so please join me in giving them a round of applause. And I also want to recognize our superstar sponsor, who was the first to sponsor this event and provided really foundational support and partnership, the Kresge Foundation. I'd like to call up, thanks. I'd like to call up John Norgren, a senior program officer at Kresge. John really has been instrumental in driving many of the successful adaptation initiatives in the nation, including the first National Adaptation Forum, which this forum is modeled after. John developed Kresge's climate adaptation strategy and manages their adaptation portfolio, which uses strategic investments and other tools to build society's capacity to lessen the harmful impacts of climate change on people and on nature. We've asked John to provide some welcoming remarks about the need to move into a new era of climate action. So, thank you, John.
And now a word from our sponsor. Kate asked me to say a few words of welcome, and I don't really have themed remarks, but do want to make a couple of comments about the timing of this convening and the nature of this, I think, seeming groundswell of interest in and focus on climate as a catalyzing force for building resilience in our communities across the country. It seems to me that there is building momentum, and we saw last year in Denver at the National Adaptation Forum a great gathering of, many of you were there, and of professionals from across the country with expertise in dozens of aspects of climate-related work. And as someone who carries the weight, as many of you do, as all of you I expect to, of the work that we do and the knowledge that is required to do it, it gave me hope. And it was great to see that as the conference was winding up last year and the decision was made not to do it every year because it's a large undertaking, and the state of California and the local government commission stepped up and said, you know, we really need to maintain this momentum, and so much is going on in California. Why don't we do an event in California in the intervening year. And I thought that sounded like a great idea, and it looks like all of you did too. So give yourselves a hand, because this is your opportunity to seek and get help from one another for the weight that you carry, and give each other hope for, there's a lot of work to do. I don't think that 10 years ago, or 5 years ago even, a gathering of this size would have been possible, focused solely on climate adaptation. We were, as a community of folks concerned about climate, focused singularly on mitigation for a long time. I want to come back to this in a minute or two. I want to say something about the Kresge Foundation and our interests, because presumably all of you are very interested in what we're funding. I'll say something about that too. But I do want to come back to this notion that climate adaptation is a sort of a new trend, or a singular focus that we should take. I'll start with Kresge. We, as a foundation, have moved our focus to focus on cities and low-income, vulnerable communities within those cities. And we see our environment program, which is focused on climate change resilience, community-based climate resilience in particular, as a primary tool for enabling communities to become more resilient across the economic and social spectrums that characterize most of America's communities. We do that by, we've changed our programs to focus on mitigation and adaptation, as it once did, to focus more broadly on community resilience. And we define community resilience as something which has aspects of adaptive capacity, mitigative response, and social cohesion. And I won't repeat that, but the idea is that we need to address the problem, its effects, and the people who are going to be affected simultaneously if we are going to build resilient communities. I think that as Kresge begins to implement this new focus, you'll begin to see initiatives that roll out that specifically define the ways in which that particular definition might apply in particular places, but it's going to be different in lots of different places. And it's going to require that we do something else. And that is to stop thinking in terms of adaptation or mitigation when we work on climate, but rather to think in terms of what we can do to best create a better community, a better world that is resilient. And I think that one of the things that we too often lose is that for those of us that focus on adaptation, is that there is a future to which we cannot adapt. And Kurt Vonnegut, who is a favorite of mine, he published a series of essays about 15 years ago. And in one of those, he wrote a letter to future generations. And a quote from that letter, which begins thus, is one of my favorites. "Dear future generations, please forgive us. We were drunk on petroleum." I think he said rolling drunk on petroleum. It would be great if the work that we all do lessens the degree to which the depth of that apology is required in the long term. And to that end, I think that as we work on adaptation, we must always be mindful of the fact that there is opportunity in engaging people in focusing on the effects of climate change short term so as to enable them to focus on the problem that is a real issue in the long term. And said differently, using climate adaptation as a means for engaging people in addressing the real problem, building public will. California is ground zero for focusing on the mitigative opportunities that we have in this country. You have been at the lead and continue to lead now on adaptation in many ways. What better way to demonstrate the interconnection of these two necessary strategies and the need for social cohesion as a component of that than in the place where you're pioneering these approaches? So a call to action, in effect, for using climate adaptation as a means for engaging people in addressing the bigger problem is how I will leave you. Kresge Foundation is going to continue to work on this, issue in multiple ways. We have a series of initiatives that we are rolling out. Most recently, we rolled out an urban opportunity initiative, which is focused on building capacity of low-income communities and community groups for engaging in climate resilience initiatives. We have over 280 applications for that. We will fund 20 planning grants nationally and 10 implementation grants next year. We're going to roll out a sustainable water resources and changing climate initiative soon. We are thinking about a coastal initiative after that. Each of these will focus specifically on this three-part definition of resilience that includes mitigation, adaptation, and social cohesion as aspects of a broader community resilience agenda. Please watch our website for opportunities for engaging with us. We want to partner with you. We want to help continue to build this community. We will continue to do field building investments in events like this and their like, and the resources and tools that communities need, and would very much like to hear from all of you, but not all at once. Thanks for your attention, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, John. And I realized I forgot to share some important logistics. I'm looking at our conference organizer over here, Kif. Bathrooms, upstairs. Take the stairs out the door. They're up there. So that's going to be important, clearly. The conferences, we're going to have all the PowerPoints up available after about 2 weeks after the event. And these sessions, the plenaries, will be recorded. So you're welcome to buy the breakouts as well, right? So if you have a session that you aren't able to attend, because we know there's so many great sessions, you can buy the recordings after the fact, share them with your colleagues. There are coupons available at the registration table, so take advantage of that. So next I want to invite our moderator for the panel, the co-founder of this event, Michael McCormick. It was Michael who first turned to me at the National Adaptation Forum and insisted that we really needed to do this in California. Actually, I think he said, I'm going to go announce that we're going to do this in California and that we're going to partner with LGC. And I thought it was a great idea, of course. So we've really been working towards this day ever since. So it's so rewarding to be here and to have all of you here with us today. Michael is a senior planner and advisor at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, where he focuses on climate change and the partnerships needed to implement climate policy at the federal, state, regional, and local level. He's actively working to institutionalize the consideration of climate change across agencies and supports the governor and his cabinet on various priority issues related to land use and climate. So I will turn it over to Michael to lead us through the panel, and I really am looking forward to hearing from our panelists and discussing with all of you over the next couple days. So thanks for being here.
And just so the speakers aren't concerned, it's not actually a panel, so you don't all have to come up. Be one at a time. Thank you, Kate. You know, this type of event would not be possible without an external organization like the Local Government Commission that is able to provide really significant logistical support, is able to do fiscal sponsorships, and is really able to help manage the amount and the volume of materials and information that goes into creating an event like this. So I just want to provide a huge thank you to Local Government Commission, particularly Kate Meese and Kif Scheuer, Jenny Woods, and the whole team for really working hard to make this event a success. They were extremely inclusive with the state as a partner to make sure that this event reflected state priorities in addition to Local Government Commission priorities. And in the definition of partnership, this is really what it is. In addition, when it comes to an event like this, which is the first one in California, there's always a monetary risk associated with that. And so they jumped in and took that risk, not knowing whether this was going to be a successful event or not. Clearly, it was a good risk, because you all are here. So I just want to give a round of applause to LGC for their work in helping to coordinate this event. Now I want to reiterate Kate's thanks to our major sponsors. Unbelievable amount of support came in from organizations across the board, in particular Kresge Foundation and the Nature Conservancy, continue their ongoing support. They've supported efforts in California for years to deal with climate change, and they continue that support in support of this. The Nature Conservancy's reception tonight, I hope you can make that as well. Should be a great time. They always throw a good reception. I also want to acknowledge a few of the major state organizations that have provided support for the event. In particular, Department of Water Resources have done a fantastic job of coordinating a lot of the art that you'll see at the event and dealing with some of the logistical issues, support of the Tools Salon, and a number of other things. They've had a massive amount of staff time put into this, and we really appreciate that work to make sure the event's a success. Department of General Services is doing live streaming of the plenary sessions over the internet on CaliforniaAdaptationForum.org. We're really excited about providing that as an option for those folks that weren't able to attend in person. And we have a photographer from Cal Recycle that is supporting the event as well. And I could list off all of the various other organizations supporting it, but I'd be here for an hour or two. So I think I'll just thank all of you for being here, being part of this discussion. You know, one of the big reasons for this event is to create a network of practitioners and scientists, professionals, laypersons, people in the community across the board working throughout the state to help move forward on some uniform goals around climate change, adaptation, and resiliency. And all of you being here is excelling that end goal. I do want to thank Laura Hansen from EcoAdapt as well. Is Laura in here? Can't really see. Well, Laura, with her support and her taking the risk to have the National Adaptation Forum, it really allowed this forum to happen. This is an affiliate forum of the National Adaptation Forum, so it's considered by them to be a regional event, although we do have a few more folks here than they had at the National Forum. But that's California. That's how it works here, right? So we're going to continue working with EcoAdapt and the folks that are helping to organize the National Adaptation Forum to take the lessons learned that we create here and take them to the national conversation, because we need to be continuing to share information, and not only within the state, but also with our external partners in other states, in the federal government, and in other countries around the world that are dealing with the same issues we are. And I think Kate mentioned the number of people engaged in the development of this conference, the hundreds of people that supported the event, the number of meetings and conference calls that we participated in to make sure this event was successful, and probably a third of you in the room were engaged at one point or another in the development of the event, and we really appreciate your work to support this discussion. So I'd just like to give a round of applause for those hundreds of people that supported the event, and you know who you are. So this forum is really designed around action. We didn't want this to be a meeting where everybody showed up, people talk to each other, and then leave, and nothing happens afterwards. We had 35 session slots, and we had way more proposals than we could fit into those slots. Many of the people in this room that aren't giving presentations at this conference could be the ones up here talking to you. So there's a massive amount of knowledge in the room, even when folks aren't doing the presentations. So I encourage you to actively engage in the discussions that are in the breakout sessions. This is about sharing information, not about talking heads. And we all know what that is, when you go to a conference and there's PowerPoints and talking heads. We want this to be engaging. We want you to take away knowledge that you can use in your own communities and your own organizations. But we also want you to help other people learn your lessons that you've learned through your work. So we need you all at the table. We think about our goals headed forward into 2050. And we've got really significant emission reduction goals. We are looking at a state that is growing significantly. We currently have about 38 million people within the state. We'll have about 50 million by 2050. And we have resource constraints now, as we know with the drought and other infrastructure challenges with a growing state. Once you add the exacerbating issue of climate change on top of that, 2050 is something that seems really far out, but with 12 million more people, it's something we need to be planning for now. A recent ULI study, Urban Land Institute study, indicated that the typical land use is in place for about 140 years. So when you think about that in context of climate change and some of the forecasts for 2100 and beyond, the things that we're putting on the ground now and we're planning now are what's going to be in place in 2100. And with climate change, it's sort of a creeping emergency when it comes to adaptation and resiliency. And so it's something we need to think about moving forward. We also need to remember, and I'm really pleased to have Mary Nichols here, the chair of the Air Resources Board, we need to remember that the best adaptation strategy is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Because if we can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we may actually be able to adapt to what's coming. And that is a really important thing to remember as we move forward, is that we're not throwing up our hands up and saying, okay, well, we're just going to adapt to it all. We're just going to become, we're not going to worry about the emissions side. That should be our foremost priority. But we also need to acknowledge that a certain amount of climate change is going to occur, it's going to affect our communities, and we need to be actively working towards addressing that. So as you go through the forum, build your network. Think about how you can talk with these people in the future, how you can work with them in the future to create policies and programs in your own communities and your own organizations to really move forward the discussions on climate change and how we're going to be working on that in the future. We've hosted a tools salon upstairs in the Clark room that is highlighting some of the state tools and resources that are available to deal with climate change. I hope you have an opportunity to wander through there and think about how you can use some of those tools in your daily work. We have other resources like the Civic Spark AmeriCorps program that's launching to bring resources to the local government level and to regional entities that are working on climate change. We have networks like the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation, which is collaborative of the individual regional groups that are working on adaptation throughout the state. Build these relationships. Think about how you can work with other people in the room to really move this discussion forward. I'm really excited to have this be the first forum with so much excitement involved, and I'm really excited about the outcomes and how you all are going to help move this path forward. The state can't do it alone, even though I know there's a number of state folks in here. It's about us moving forward together. So I think at this point, I'm going to introduce my boss, Ken Alex. He's going to provide the welcome from the governor's office. He's the director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and a senior policy advisor to Governor Jerry Brown. He's focused on energy, environment, and land use issues. Ken and OPR work on issues and policies that protect and promote the state's environment and economy. Before joining the governor's office, Ken was a senior assistant in the Attorney General's office, heading the environmental section of the California Attorney General's office and co-head of its global warming unit. So during his tenure there, Ken negotiated agreements with San Bernardino County, ConocoPhillips, for the first required greenhouse gas emissions reductions in the country. So I want to welcome Ken Alex to the podium here to give a welcome from the governor's office and talk a little bit more about the work that's moving forward.
Wow, it's quite a full room. Good morning, everybody. I do, in fact, want to welcome you here on behalf of Governor Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown has a very long association with the local government commission, so we are very pleased to continue that affiliation and be co-sponsors, OPR, local government commission, and I want to also do a shout out to the Natural Resources Agency that is also sponsoring this event today. So thank you. You've heard plenty of thanks this morning, so one last time, thank you all for being here. It's extremely impressive that we have this turnout, and as others have said, hopefully this is the beginning of a turning point, a tipping point on this set of issues. It can sometimes be very depressing to go to climate change events. So I thought I'd start in a little bit different place. California is doing more than really anywhere else in the country on climate change. So I want to just start there with the mitigation part of this and just remind folks some of the things that in a very short time that California has done and is doing. So let me just kind of go through some of those to remind everybody at the power of action, of the things that this state has been able to do and is continuing to do, and the goals that it is setting that we think are viable and realistic. So starting with the Renewable Portfolio Standard, we have a goal of 33% as a minimum as part of our electric system will be renewables by 2020. We're at about 25% right now. I think everybody is very confident that we'll be at least 33% by 2020. And remember, our renewable portfolio standard does not include large-scale hydro or nuclear. So by 2020, we will have moving very close to 50% of our power generated from sources that do not emit greenhouse gases. So yeah, that's worth California has returned to its leadership really in the world on storage of power. We have a requirement now for 1,300 megawatts of storage that is different than anywhere else in the world. And now every major storage company around the globe is working in California to try to meet that standard and to sell their products here. Storage, for those of you who don't follow this as closely, is potentially really world-changing. Because if you can tie storage at a reasonable price with renewables, then you no longer need carbon-based fuel. So we're watching this very closely, and California is the leader in this area. California's mobile emission standards for cars and trucks, and we always need to do a shout out for Mary Nichols, is now the national is now the national standard. And California is working on where the standards are going next to make them even more forward producing. We have something called a low carbon fuel standard, which by 2020 will reduce the carbon content of fuels by 10%. That is a very significant policy that is going to drive change. In connection with that, we have our cap and trade system, which so far is working well, and fuels are scheduled to be under the cap starting next year. That is a very important move forward as well. Electric vehicles, California has close to 100,000 electric vehicles on the road today. In a state with 30 million vehicles, that is not a huge number, but it is by far the most of anywhere in the world. And we now have set, through executive order, the goal of 1.5 million by 2025. We are working very hard on electric vehicle infrastructure, and you will see very clearly throughout your communities, and we hope to work with many of you in your communities on building out the infrastructure that will give people the confidence that if they have an electric vehicle, they're not going to be stranded and they'll be able to have charging as appropriate. So I think that is going to change quite rapidly. In addition, we're now moving forward on what used to be called the hydrogen highway, but now fuel cells, both stationary and mobile, are becoming a reality in California. These are very significant changes. California is working around the world. We're working with India and China, Mexico and Chile, the European Union, many countries in Europe, Japan, on multiple issues around reducing things like black carbon, promoting markets for electric vehicles. These are substantive actions, not just paper agreements. The governor will be meeting shortly with governors from provinces around China to have concrete action. And we are actually making progress. The Air Resources Board is working closely with China around their pollution issues, which also tends to be greenhouse gas emission reducing as well. And things are changing. Land use, something that my office, the Office of Planning and Research, does a huge amount of work on. We are working on dealing with the fact that Californians drive 330 billion miles a year. It's about 4,000 trips to the sun, in case you were interested. And we'd like to see that reduced to some extent, and we're working on things like promotion of infill and better protection of open space and agricultural land so that we have a better transportation system and have different options. Energy efficiency, where we need to do more work. Watch this space, because under AB 758, we're going to be producing a roadmap for energy efficiency that will move that issue forward, I think, in a world-changing kind of way. And now we're beginning our focus on what do we do after 2020? How do we get to 2030 with goals and do it in an economically sensible way that keeps us on the path to the very difficult reductions that we need by 2050, which are 80% below 1990 levels. Those are very serious challenges, but we think that there are pathways that get us there, that keep California in the lead, and that make huge differences, and as Michael said, allow us to have the ability to adapt to the climate changes that are coming in a way that allows us to thrive and move forward. So with all of that, nonetheless, climate change is here. It is an enormous and growing challenge. So you know the normal set of plagues that we talk about at these conferences, the loss of snowpack, limits on water supply, flooding from runoff. I like putting those two together. We lose our water, we run it off earlier, we have both sets of problems. Increased fire season and intensity. Chief Himlot is here to talk about some of those sets of issues. Rising seas, coastal impacts, insect-borne diseases, heat-related issues. You know, it's one of those things where you can say that California truly has it all. So we need to address it. We need to confront it, and that's why all of us are here. The state, as most of you know and will hear about throughout the next couple of days, has just released a report called Safeguarding California. And I just want to read through the 9 sectors which Safeguarding California hopes to address. And I suspect it will fit very nicely with the things that you're working on as well. So agriculture, biodiversity and habitat, emergency management, energy, forestry, oceans and coastal, public health, transportation, and water. So each of these standing on their own pose substantial challenges. Putting them all together is really a bit daunting. But the overwhelming response to things like this forum, I think, give us reason to feel that we are going to make progress, that we are making progress, And what I would say is that we are starting to embody the set of reforms that we need to take. We know now that we must integrate resilience into all of our decision making, into our infrastructure. So the question is, how do we do that? And how do we fund it? And I think those are the essential questions that we face at a local level, at a state level, at a federal level, and at an international level. The state faces really the same set of challenges that the local governments face. And we know that communities are the front line in this set of issues. When there's flooding, when there's coastal erosion, it is local communities that are necessarily the entities that have to deal with this first. So those of us from the state are here to learn from local communities, as I hope you're here to learn from the state as well. And obviously we are working on many fronts at the state government level to promote resilience and adaptation, including building those concepts into state infrastructure decisions. You'll hear about a lot of the efforts that the state is making and a lot of local efforts as well. I want to just mention three. You'll hear about these more through the course of the day and tomorrow, but I just want to highlight them in part because my office is working on some of them. The first, which you may not immediately think of, is that we are in the process of updating general plan guidelines. Now, those of you who work in local government know that general plans are often difficult to do, to keep updated, and they're often expensive. So we are actually trying to reimagine the general plan, to move it into an online form, to reduce the price, to make all kinds of mapping tools available, all kinds of massive amounts of data, so that the process is easier to do, more transparent. And we're also building templates around things like infill development, around things like resilience and adaptation. And one of the things that we're doing is to build the concept of adaptation, resilience into every element of the general plan process. So we will be issuing those draft guidelines in the next few months, and we hope that all of you here will be engaged in the review process and thinking about how general plans can be part and parcel of moving forward on resilience and adaptation. I think they're essential as you think about how local governments integrate this set of issues into their planning and decision making. Second one I want to mention, Michael mentioned briefly, Civic Spark. You'll probably hear about that. It is another collaboration between the Local Government Commission and the Office of Planning and Research. We're going to have about 50, probably mostly young professionals, but perhaps across the spectrum, who are going to be sent into local communities that would like to have them. And we encourage you, for those of you from local communities, to check it out and see if it works for your community. These young professionals will be working on issues that are important to the local communities around climate change. And we fully expect that adaptation and resilience will be a big part of that. So if you have projects and ideas and thoughts for how to use these folks and how to take advantage of that, we are very interested in getting together with you and promoting that possibility. And if it works, we're going to try to expand it. We're already talking with the federal government about whether the project makes sense on a national level. And the final thing I want to mention is the water bond. So as you know, there's a $7 billion water bond that was just passed out of the legislature, and it is all about resilience and adaptation in pretty much all of its aspects. But there's a long way to go between here and having that $7.5 billion available, much of which is connected to local community needs. We need to pass it. And it's part of, I think, all of our obligations to try to promote it, given what we're here to talk about today, because as we know, water is extremely central to our issues of resilience and adaptation here in California. So with that, let me welcome you all. Thank you for being here. I hope you will read the 300+ pages of the safeguarding plan, help us make it better, maybe shorter. The governor, as I think all of you know, is absolutely committed to the climate change fight, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation, and echoes the view that's already been expressed that these two really need to merge to make the most possible progress. So over 800 people participating today. I think our ranks and our commitment is growing, and our combined efforts on mitigation and resilience will enable California not only to continue to lead, but to prosper as well. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Ken. Don't be shy, those of you standing in the back, there's plenty of seats up front. Remember, this is an opportunity to meet people you don't typically work with. So sit with someone you don't know. I don't see any movement. Come on, folks. So Ken mentioned Civic Spark. There's some materials out on the Local Government Commission table if you're interested in taking a look at those. And he was talking about the Safeguarding California plan. I did want to highlight that this event is, a lot of the sector tracks are fashioned after the sectors that are outlined in the Safeguarding California plan. So there is some nexus between the Safeguarding plan and this event itself. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Frances Bevy-Weber is the Vice Chair of the California State Water Resources Control Board. Fran was first appointed to the State Water Resources Control Board in 2007 and reappointed last year to another 4-year term. She previously served as the Executive Director of the Mono Lake Committee, and she directed international programs for the National Audubon Society, in addition to being a legislative assistant for the Animal Welfare Institute. She was a member of the Bay Delta Public Advisory Committee and co-chair of its Water Use Efficiency Committee, and was also co-chair of the Southern California Water Dialogue, convener of the California Urban Water Conservation Council, and a board member for the Water Education Foundation and California Council of Land Trusts. So Fran's going to talk with us for a bit about the state's response to the drought, the impact of climate change on water, and the important partnerships we must form in order to effectively and adequately respond to the increasing dry conditions facing California. So, Fran, thank you so much for being here.
And thank all of you for being here. It's very exciting. This is, and thank you to the sponsors and to the people who have worked so hard to put this together. Ken has already outlined a lot of the major challenges that water is facing from climate change. The issues of drought, flooding, the exacerbation of these two events with creations of sediment going into dams and going into waterways and harming the habitats of various places. Sea level rise is another issue that we're dealing with, certainly on the coast, but streams are drying up. It's affecting everyone. So you all know this. And so I want to move very quickly forward to, as Ken also set the tone, as to what can we do. And I'm going to give you some examples, but I'll start off with what my principal themes are. One is leadership. And it's not leadership just from the governor, although that's very, very helpful. It's leadership from your mayors, from your city council. It's leadership at the schools and the school boards. It's leadership throughout our society, leaders need to be using the information from climate and embracing the opportunity of making some changes as we move forward. A second theme is financing. While not everything costs lots of money and volunteers can do tremendous things and existing budgets can cover a lot of change, we probably do need to be much more creative in our financing. And we've heard a little bit about financing, certainly from cap and trade and other areas. But we need to be spending a lot more time on financing, particularly making sure that our financing that does exist already is going to those things that are going to make us stronger in the future. And thirdly, authority. We need to get authority to the right level. Sometimes it's the individual. Sometimes it's an entity, a business, or a community group, or a city, or a town. And sometimes it is the state. Sometimes it is the federal government. So being very attentive to where authority lies and who is being mobilized by it, and not keeping that authority too tightly held in some area where it's really not making a difference. So those are the three big areas that I see as needing attention. And then there's some behavioral activities like listening. If we're going to be doing some change, if we're going to ask people to do things differently, we need to hear what their concerns are when they anticipate this change. What are they saying, and how are they saying it? And maybe there's some things that we will need to change as well. We need to be flexible. We need to embrace change. We don't really know exactly what we're going to have to do even 5 and 10 years from now. So we just are going to have to become a much more flexible institution. And speaking as a regulator, that's difficult. So I fully understand what I'm saying. I have 2 examples of where this has started to occur. One is the drought. The governor in early February adopted an emergency rule that basically gave authority to the Water Board and to others to address drought issues. Very, very important. The Water Board, and I'll take it down to my level because there were many other activities that were going on beyond water under the emergency regulations. The Water Board adopted regulations both on the agriculture water rights side, but then also on the urban side. And I'll focus again on the urban decisions that we made. In July of this year, just last month, we adopted emergency regulations for urban water use. And it was fairly simple. We couldn't have done it without the governor's emergency order, but we took it and we came up with 4 prohibitions, with an order to water agencies that they ask their citizens, the people that they serve, their customers, to go to mandatory water restrictions. And we ask people to report on a regular basis. Now, that covers most of the water agencies that are in the state of California, but doesn't cover them all. So the California Public Utilities Commission just last week adopted a very similar order. Now everyone is covered. So in terms of taking leadership, the governor took leadership, the agencies took leadership, and these are out there. But what has been the effect? Well, first of all, the effect has been just heartening. It has been so exciting because individuals seem like they have been pent up waiting to try to do something about the drought. And they didn't feel like they quite had the authority to do it. Now they do. They are being extremely creative. Businesses are weighing in as well. In Southern California, Clear Channel Outdoor has donated some billboards for promoting a new character called Lawn Dude. And Lawn Dude is trying to wean himself from drinking too much water. But as Mary mentioned to me this morning, we've got to be a little bit careful about this enthusiasm because, sometimes people are overly enthusiastic and they may be killing their trees, which is very important from a climate change perspective. So every action is going to require some thinking and possibly some pulling back as we move forward. This unleashing of local activities and the enthusiasm that cities and counties and communities have embraced will start to show up in the numbers, we expect, because people are going to be reporting on their water use starting, the first deadline was last Friday. So sometime this week, you will start seeing how much water people are using and how much less they're using than they used last year. At least that's what I'm hoping. Another example the leadership started not at the state level, but started at the local level, at the city council level. There was a wastewater treatment plant that had been around for 40 years, and quite frankly, most of our wastewater treatment plants have been around for about 40 years, and almost all of them are going to have to be replaced. This one, it was in a coastal area, and it was pretty low it was about at sea level. Now, when you build a new treatment plant, you're going to spend a whole lot of money, and if you spend the money and get the good engineering that you will get these days, that plant is likely to last another 40 years. And so the city had an opportunity to rethink where they might put their treatment plant. They also had to work with the Regional Water Board. They had to work with the Coastal Commission, and they had to work with their citizens and their businesses to figure out what to do. The decision was made to move this plant up to a higher elevation. Now, there's going to be pumping involved, and so that's going to create an electricity draw. So they're going to have to work on that, and I will hasten to say this hasn't totally happened yet, but the decision to move has happened. And but the opportunities once they get into on higher ground are vast. They're in an area, a coastal area, that doesn't have a lot of water. They can do recycling with the sewage treatment plant that they have. And the recycling is, the water made available from recycling is needed by farmers who are finding it harder and harder to get water on the coastal areas. Some of the water can possibly be used in some of the creeks that are starting to dry up. Certainly some of it could be used to prevent sea level incursion into the groundwater basins. And these are opportunities that in the old location could never have been contemplated. The choices that people make as they move into these new creative approaches can be very exciting, can be very challenging, and but they are the future. And it is the sooner we get leadership at the local level, at the county level, at the regional level, at the state level on board with embracing this change and looking at the opportunities that it offers to all of us, I think the better off we will be. And I apologize because I will be having to leave at least for a lot of today because we have a board meeting today. So I will have to take my leave. But before I do, I just want to again thank you for being here in such large numbers. And I do hope that all of you will go back and make an appointment to go and see your mayor, all your members of your city council. You will start to visit the committees that are out there that deal with planning and that deal with parks and recreation and that deal with public works, because honestly, that's where the leadership is that we are going to be needing to call on. And then, if you need extra people to help you, you can turn to this new program that is being the Civic Spark. I just learned about it today. I'm very excited. I want to see it happening in Southern California, which is where I live. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Fran, and thanks for the real-world example. Those are always helpful. For those folks that are tweeting the event, hashtag CAF14, CAF14 is the hashtag for the event. So I'm going to introduce Chief Ken Pemlott right now. He's the Chief and Director of the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. He was appointed CAL FIRE Director in 2011. And he's a 23-year CAL FIRE veteran. He's also a California State Forester. He previously held department positions as Deputy Director of Fire Protection and Assistant Deputy Director. He oversaw CAL FIRE's fire protection operations, cooperative fire training, and safety programs. During his career at the agency, he's risen through the ranks, beginning as a seasonal firefighter in the Tulare unit and held a variety of resource management and fire protection positions. He holds a bachelor's degree in forest resource management from Humboldt State University and is a registered professional forester. And we're really happy to have him here today. He's going to be heading up to the Tahoe Summit after this. So Ken, come join us on stage. Thank you again.
Good morning, and thank you, Michael. I'm obviously the state forester, director of CAL FIRE, and that staff person on the governor's staff who they say go deal with the fire issues that are causing us to emit greenhouse gas and not meet that attainment. So we have a lot of challenges and goals that we need to work on, but I absolutely am encouraged and in awe by the attendance here. This says a lot for the first Adaptation Forum to have this level of participation. But literally as we're meeting here today, we are still working to contain several large lightning-caused fires in the northern half of the state, as well as dealing with a number of new emerging fires both in Kern and Madera County this morning that are threatening several communities in those counties. Just 2 weeks ago, we were battling over 17 major fires throughout Northern California and the Central Sierra. And we continue to receive new additional lightning strikes, both yesterday and it's in the forecast again for this week. Wildfires are nothing new to California. We know we've had a long history of that. And certainly lightning isn't new to California or the western United States. What is the changing conditions that we've already talked about this morning and the impacts that both lightning and man-caused, human-caused fires are having on the state and our environment and our people. What we're seeing is a longer and drier fire season. I like to quote Dr. Westerling, University of California, Merced. He's really, and his colleagues have published, in my mind, really the best paper on climate change in terms of its impacts on fire and forest health in California. And what he talks about is that in the last 40 years, over the last 40 years in the western United States, fire season has increased in length on average over 70 days. That means it's starting earlier and lasting longer. That's significant for this state. We're seeing vegetation that is drier and more flammable. We have seen this year alone record low fuel moistures, or the amount of moisture in the vegetation as we measure it throughout the year. We've also seen record high fire intensities, the heat with which the vegetation is giving off when it's burning. We've historically recognized a year-round fire season in Southern California. That's happened over the decades, but we're now seeing that trend throughout the entire state. Changing weather patterns have led to fires in the Sierras and in extreme Northern California in the winter months. For example, just this year, the first week of January, Humboldt County, one of the wettest places in the country, experienced a 350-acre fire New Year's weekend. That level of fire, that amount, that burning with that intensity in those places in the state are setting precedents that we have not seen previously. Since January of this year to date, we have had over 4,100 fires in the state within primarily private lands. On top of that, the fires burning on national forest and other public lands. That's over 500 more fires for this time of year than we would normally have. And an interesting statistic is that in just January alone, we had reached well over 400 fires for the year just in 1 month. Very significant statistic, and really painting the picture of not only the impact of the drought we're in and the 3 years of below normal precipitation, but certainly this larger impact of climate change across the state. In going out and talking to firefighters this year, the common theme among very experienced firefighters at all levels, local, state, and federal, has been the explosive rates at which these fires are burning. Now, what many folks aren't seeing is that we're containing most of these fires because we are very aggressive at putting these out to protect infrastructure, lives, and the natural resources. But folks are putting out probably over 200 to 300 fires a week are occurring in the state. We're putting most of those out. But they do escape that initial attack because of the conditions that we're seeing. And they do pose risks, and they do pose threats to a number of infrastructure and assets around the state. Power lines. Infrastructure threat, power lines run across the state. And of course, fires occur at the same time when the state faces warm weather and potential heat emergencies, and power use is at a premium. So it's obviously a critical threat to power line infrastructure when these power lines are working their way through or strung across wildland areas, and the threats that fire has to shut down the power grid. Water supply impacts. Talked a little bit about that already today, but we're certainly seeing it in the firefighting community. Drought has reduced the supply of the water supply available for firefighters. Particularly, we're seeing it at higher elevation. Lakes that we would normally access by helicopter to scoop water and drop on the fires aren't as readily as available they were in the past. So helicopters and other resources are having to go further to get that water to fight the fire. We're also seeing, just in these recent fires in Northern California, impact to water infrastructure. These fires threatened dams, hydroelectric facilities, and water conveyance flumes that, again, at a time when water is critical, they're impacting that infrastructure. Reduced air quality. We certainly saw it last year with the American and the Rim fires burning simultaneously here and the smoke impacts to the Central Valley. We also saw it just a few weeks ago as the smoke backed up from Northern California down into the valley. These creates obviously health impacts to sensitive populations and increased demand on health services. Loss of critical habitat. These fires are burning with an intensity that are not of the historic or maybe the more natural environment. And so we're seeing stand replacing or watershed destroying intensities that have an impact on things such as anadromous samonid habitats, the sage grouse habitat in northeastern California, and other critical habitat. Loss of forest land. Many of these fires that were burning in this last week were in primarily timbered or forested landscapes. Obviously, it has a direct impact on our ability to sequester carbon because we're losing that through intense fires, impact on watershed health, the economic impacts through the loss of timber revenues and other community revenues that occur or that don't occur, such as recreation when fires are occurring. And then certainly the increased mortality from insects and disease that in and of themselves are impacting our forested communities, but also predispose a forest stand to more intense wildfire. And then certainly there is the impact directly on communities. Loss of individual homes, businesses, and in some cases whole communities from these devastating and extreme wildfires. Nearly half of the 20 most damaging fires in the state's history have occurred just since 2003. That is a very significant statistic. Again, nearly half have occurred just since 2003. As identified in the forest sector or the forestry chapter of the Safeguarding California, we must prepare for these impacts. We are already realizing them, but we must be prepared and learn to adapt for them into the future. So what is California doing? First of all, we have the 2010 Strategic Fire Plan, which is a document with 7 goals, which is the overarching plan for addressing wildland fire in California. Everything from data collection, public education, fuels treatment, wildland fire response, land use planning. It is the overarching document that guides us to wildland fire mitigation and protection in the state. We're also looking at larger interagency level initiatives, collaboratives with the Forest Service, Nature Conservancy, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and many other partners around the state to look at watershed level and sub-watershed level projects across boundaries to demonstrate how we can make watersheds and communities fire safe and fire resistant. We've talked about cap and trade. Forestry sector is the benefit of natural and working lands funding through cap and trade for a variety of initiatives that include investing in the urban forestry sector, reforestation, forest health, fuels treatment, forest stand management, and several other key initiatives. We are excited. This is the first opportunity where we've had a chance to reinvest back into the forest sector with these funds and really have an opportunity, again, to do individual projects as well as work with communities across landscapes to enhance forest health, protect our forest waters and watersheds, and work towards sequestering carbon. State responsibility area. CAL FIRE is responsible for 31 million acres of almost entirely private land within what we call state responsibility area. We are investing fire prevention funding coming from residents in those areas for fuels treatment, both for CAL FIRE crews and for California Conservation Corps crews to work in and around these communities in the urban interface areas to reduce fuel loading and help protect these communities. The governor approved and the legislature supported and approved a one-time $10 million grant program for external stakeholders, fire districts, fire safe councils, resource conservation districts to do fire safe work around the state, everywhere from public education, vegetation management, and other fire protection activities. And key to what both Ken and Michael talked about, increased land use planning review and defensible space inspections. We have an increased capacity along with the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection to engage with our local government partners on the review of the public safety element of the land use or the general plans. This is key. We can't necessarily go back and fix the development that's already occurred in the wildland, but we can certainly work towards hardening those structures and developing and embracing plans for the future as new development occurs to make them the fire-safe communities that they need to be and be more resistant to wildland fire. And then public education. We have several campaigns going, Ready for Wildfire, which is at the CAL FIRE website, which walks homeowners and property owners through everything they need to do to prepare. We also have One Less Spark, which is a national campaign that talks about preventing wildfire, because every spark, particularly with the conditions we see now, can and generally does become a wildland fire. Sustainable forest biomass utilization. We need the incentives for forest landowners to modify the fuel loading and maintain healthy managed forest stands. To do that, we need to deal with the byproducts that come out of cutting and removing that fuel loading. We need the ability to support economically based incentives to get that out. Senate Bill 1122 talks about the distributed small electrical distribution or electrical generation facilities. We really want and are going to continue to push with our partners in promoting biomass and bioenergy production out in the wildland areas. Also, the Forest Carbon Plan. The Climate Change Scoping Plan requires a forest carbon plan to be developed by the end of 2016. It needs to set planning targets to increase carbon sequestration. We're focusing that in the forestry sector. Forests need to be a carbon sink rather than a carbon emitter. And unless we can develop healthy forest stands that resist the impacts of large damaging fires, those forest stands, when they burn in these intense conditions, will continue to be emitters. This plan will be a roadmap to help us get there. A forest climate team has been established with a multi-agency co-led group by CAL FIRE, the Natural Resources Agency, and the California Environmental Protection Agency. That group, reaching out to key stakeholders across the state, will be working over the next 18 months to develop this plan to get us there. The longer-term impacts of climate change are just beginning. We are not going to prevent it from occurring. We're going to help mitigate its impacts. The key is working together to develop and implement effective strategies to ensure California is resilient in the face of these changes. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and look forward to working with everybody more.
Thank you, Ken. So I'm pleased to announce our last plenary keynote for this morning. Mary Nichols is the chair of the California Air Resources Board. She was named to Time's 2013 list of the 100 most influential people. Mary Nichols has devoted her career in public and nonprofit service and advocating for the environment and public health. She has served as the chairman of the California Air Resources Board since 2007, her second stint as chair. There, Mary has led the effort to implement AB 32, oversees a variety of other efforts to improve California's air quality, and under her leadership, ARB implemented the world's most comprehensive cap-and-trade program and other innovative regulations to cut greenhouse gas emissions and drive investments in cleaner, more efficient technologies. We've asked Mary to provide a welcome and an overview from her perspective as chair of ARB and a constant champion of action on climate in California. She has a really valuable perspective on co-benefits of emissions reductions and adaptation. And when asked of the climate action team, what are some things we should focus on, she was, of all the people we sent the email to the first person to respond to that email request. A constant champion of collaboration and involvement of a wide table and a round table. Mary, thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that very warm introduction and welcome. As Mike indicated, I have several functions here this morning. You've been sitting for quite a while, patiently already. So I can do some of this quickly. First of all, welcome. Welcome. Secondly, the charge for this conference is indeed the culmination of a lot of work and effort, and many people have been thanked for what they've done and for the contribution that they've made. I think that sometimes when we get bogged down in thinking about the divides in our country and in our society between red states and blue states, and people who think climate change is a hoax, and people who think climate change is here and real and has to be acted on. We forget that actually some of the biggest divides are among ourselves when it comes to being able to actually work together to cross turf lines and division lines within our own institutions. And it has been one of the great joys and privileges, as far as I'm concerned, of this time in state government to see the way in which local and state agencies are coming together, state agencies crossing lines in terms of jurisdictions that are historically have made us competitors at times when we should have been really collaborating. The issue of climate change does require us to move beyond all of those kinds of divisions and to find what each can bring to the table and how we can build on each other's activities. And that is really happening now. And the program today, I think, is good evidence of the fact that we have already been able to achieve a lot. In preparation for today, I did actually read Safeguarding California. I felt it was incumbent upon me, since I had been told that part of my job was to pitch that document, and I do commend it to you because it's got a lot of terrific stuff in it. A lot of good thinking went into it. It's well written, it's well organized, it's interesting. Certainly I found it interesting. And one of the reasons why I found it interesting is because it organizes things that I've been working on and thinking about in my AB 32 scoping plan implementation world in a slightly different way. But the crossover is really quite remarkable in terms of the 9 elements that are in the plan. They track very neatly with the updated scoping plan for AB 32, showing indeed that in the real world, implementation or mitigation and adaptation are 2 sides of the exact same coin. This is not just rhetoric anymore or aspirational. I think it's actually what's happening as we move forward. As Chief Pimlett referenced earlier, the Forestry Climate Action Team is taking what was in the latest scoping plan, the update to the scoping plan, and looking to develop the actionable, enforceable, implementable programs that are going to actually make sure that our forests are carbon sinks instead of carbon sources. And in doing that, it's going to take planning ideas that sometimes have not been able to be translated into tons and accountability, and develop methods for making sure that that happens. But it's also going to take the counting side of things, which my agency is responsible for, into a realm of thinking from a resource manager perspective that we've never done before either. And both of these are absolutely essential to our success. The third element to all of this, of course, and in some ways the overarching one, is the ways and means to make the kind of changes that we're talking about. To be sustainable is not only a matter of changing the way we think, it's also a matter of mobilizing the resources, including money, to make the changes that we know have to happen. The Cap and Trade program was designed as the best instrument that we could think of at the time to put a price on carbon and create an enforceable cap that would assure that the state of California would get to the limits that we set for ourselves in the statute to return our emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. And the way it did it is, the way it does it is by requiring entities that are subject to this program, which is about covering about 85% of the California economy with fuels under the cap, to have allowances to cover their operations. It created, in effect, a new currency in the form of allowances. It also, therefore, gave an opportunity to create some financial wherewithal internally to the companies that are doing it, who now have to track what they're spending for their allowances, and externally as a result of the auctioning of a small fraction of those allowances, which has now created a stream of revenue that comes to the state legislature that can be appropriated specifically for purposes of achieving our climate goals. Now, this is a remarkable new program. I'm sure nobody here who works in California has missed the fact that there is some funding now coming into the state to work on some issues that have been bereft for quite some time. And this is a remarkable feature of the program, although it was not designed specifically for that purpose. But the fact that we have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on these is both a tremendous opportunity and also a tremendous challenge, because it shows how far short we are of what we actually need to make the investments that we know we're going to have to make to actually carry out all of our goals in terms of making the state climate resilient, of mitigating our emissions, and continuing to make progress on the leadership that we have already established in the world. So we must continue to keep the thinking about how we make these things real, focused on financing tools as well as on policy. And to do that, of course, means that we also need to be looking to expertise that comes to us from other sectors besides the traditional policy advocacy world, and in the world of private finance and capital as well, because we've seen a real shifted thinking in that world as our climate programs continue to attract not only some of the best scientists in the world to study what's happening here and to try to help us devise the technologies that are going to help us address these problems, because we can't do it without technology, but also to look at new tools that will enable us to use that information and to bring the technologies into the world where real people can get real jobs and make their livings doing this kind of work as well. So everybody here is a climate activist, and you're working in your own communities. We can't do the work that we do at the Air Resources Board without the knowledge that you're all out there implementing these programs and bringing ideas forward and helping to make sure that the public continues to have the awareness and the confidence that these are issues that we can tackle as a society. We're optimists in California. We are known for our willingness to be pioneers, and we're doing it once again here. So I think that's enough for now. I think you need a break to stand up, go get some coffee, and remember that 95% of what you get out of any conference is what you do out in the hall. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. So just a quick reminder of a couple of things. I know sometimes these plenaries and even the sessions will take you on a roller coaster ride of climate emotions. So I wanted to remind you of a couple of things in that regard before we break. So, the knowledge of impacts is important, but that's not the only thing. The real world examples is a great place to get inspiration. And you balance that with sort of a long-term vision and thinking where we're going to go in the future. That's a really important component too. When I think about the work that I'm doing on the ground, I think about my 3-year-old daughter, and that she'll be 89 years old in 2100. And there may be various iterations of McCormick's that are involved in that. But you know, thinking about future generations rather than just the now is really important. We're feeling the impacts. We see the impacts are going to be exacerbated in the future. But let's think optimistically about the work that we can do on the ground to help change the world for what we want it to be in the future. So now logistics informations. Remember, bathrooms are upstairs. This is the most important part, right? Bathrooms are upstairs, and the sponsor displays are outside in the foyer area. The recordings are going to be available online on the CaliforniaAdaptationForum.org. The Twitter account is #CAF14. I want to acknowledge all of our funders again, Kresge Foundation, TNC, the Sacramento Air Districts, and Sacramento Municipal Utility District in particular. And I actually wanted to highlight someone who hasn't been mentioned yet, but Amber Paris, who was a part of the original visioning team for the development of this conference at the National Adaptation Forum. I believe she's here as well, so thank her for being a part of that initial effort. And J.R. De La Rosa, who's the Assistant Secretary for Climate at the Natural Resources Agency, and he's a part of the executive committee, I believe over there somewhere, but he's newly in that position, so please introduce yourself to him. And I think that is about it. Have a wonderful conference. This is very exciting to have you all here. Make new friends, and we look forward to the discussion moving forward.